Welcome to Bitter Reality Brewing. This is the top 10 tips, tricks, recommendations, hacks, suggestions, awareness, whatever you want to call it. Don't forget, like, subscribe, keep sharing. Definitely appreciate the sharing. And you're looking at the gloves going, what is he doing? Well, it's that time. No, just kidding. Couldn't resist. Couldn't resist. Well, before we jump into the top 10, which is going to be very quick, let's take a quick little gander. Start a new series, knowing that the top 10 tips, tricks, recommendations, and blah, 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 is coming to a close slowly, but soon. This is week 29, and I don't have too many weeks left. We're gonna start doing taste testings from world of beers, whatever you wanna call it. Beers from around the world is kind of what I'm leaning towards. And I've already shot the first episode, which hopefully will be out soon. But without much further ado though, we're gonna jump right into number 1. Disposable gloves. I'm not a person who uses these at this time, but it's kind of like a light bulb went off. I was watching Justin, Bad Math Brewing. He's only got one video out right now. It's a nice little review on a Fermzilla. Did a great job, and he's working on some more he's got coming out. I just want to make sure I give him credit where credit's due because I had never seen anybody do this before. He works professionally in a brewing industry. And one of the things is wearing gloves makes perfect sense. And I usually wear things like that, but that's usually when I'm doing stuff like smoking ribs and pork butts and things like that. I want to say they're called nitrile black gloves. They're industrial grade, I love them. But I just threw these on because this was similar to what he had. Is that whenever he's working on the fermenter or whatever it's where it could get contaminated, to reduce contamination, he's got gloves on. And I know you're thinking, why? Well, think about it this way. Most dust is from human skin, at least in a house. So we shed constantly, and your hands are constantly shedding. I mean, constantly, you don't realize how much. Other people, which I have some autoimmune issues that trigger some heart problems, don't do well around chemicals. I'm allergic to bleach, chlorine. So this is my Star San. It's a lot easier to put it on your hands with gloves and not have any kind of reaction. So if you happen to have where your skin gets irritated from any kind of chemicals, I have seen other brewers on YouTube where they've used gloves when they're cleaning, which is smart, especially with PBW, because that stuff definitely lights me up a bit. But I almost need to wear a mask because it's inhalation that jacks me up the most. But yeah, number 1, disposable gloves. Something nice and easy, throw away, keeps pollutants out, reduces the chance of infection on stuff you're working with, and keeps the chemicals off your skin. If you don't mind, I will take these off because my hands sweat incredibly badly with gloves. If it's warm outside and I put gloves on, I got little pools of sweat in it. It's disgusting. Number 2, and I actually had somebody ask about this and I was like, yeah, definitely. Use either a Whrilfloc Tablet, super moss, or Irish moss. Use something at the very end of your boil, the last 5 to 15 minutes, however you want, I don't care. Whether it's a 1 gallon, which is where I got asked about it, or it's 50 gallons, whatever beer you're brewing, use a Whrilfloc Tablet, super moss, or Irish moss. And kind of Irish moss, I got a big old thing of it here. This is what I used to swear by. And I say it because that's just what I used. It was cheap, it's inexpensive, it does a decent job. I'm not gonna say it does a great job. We all know who 5 Star is. They make Star San PBW. This is super moss, and it did a good job. I'm not gonna say it did a bad job, but it did a good job. And I used it for probably about a year before I decided, and I know you're gonna go, are you kidding me? I had not tried a Whrilfloc Tablet. I went straight from super moss to super moss. Yeah, from Irish moss to super moss. Moss tongue twister, to Whrilfloc tablets. And they're different sizes sometimes, so I'm kind of starting to wonder about that. I'll have to research that, but I just took notice to the sizes are a little different. But the reason isn't just for the clarity of the beer. It will help pull a lot of that other gunk and crap out of your wort. So when you're moving it, even if you move it over, it's binding to it and it's going to pull it out of suspension and help bring it out of the main beer. You don't want all that extra crap sitting in your beer, especially adding flavors to the beer that you maybe didn't want. Don't know if it's going to give you astringency or not, but you want the crap out of your beer. Number 3, you got a friend that has gluten issues. You have gluten issues. I may have. I'm in denial right now, we'll just say, but I'm starting to kind of confirm I may have some issues as I've gotten older. I definitely don't do well with dairy, so Clarity Ferm. And yeah, I feel like I'm doing a commercial, but Clarity Ferm, it's an enzyme. It is supposed to help clarify your beer. You pitch it when you pitch your yeast. But, and I've mentioned this in another video, it reduces the gluten, which is a protein, down to 20 parts per million or less. Anything below 20 parts per million or at 20 parts per million or less is considered gluten-free because it is so minute, it should not create a problem or create big problems. I have been in the forums and I have noticed a lot of people who swear by this that do have gluten issues, and they're like, dude, I put this in every beer and I don't have issues anymore. It's awesome. So if you're a big beer brewer and you've like, no, I can't do it anymore, I've got gluten issues, you have no excuse. Come on, drop one in there, rock on, it's all good. Number 4. Yeah, I'm sticking to a kind of a yeast theme or a beer theme. Oh, we're always on a beer theme, sorry. But additives and things doing with, I think, fermentation. Is yeast a beer nutrient? And this is a blend. You can buy it in bulk, you can buy it in smaller containers, but this is Wyeast's Yeast Nutrient. So number 4 is Yeast Nutrient. One question, because I know people are like, oh, I've never used it, I don't need it. Why wouldn't you help your yeast thrive? Why wouldn't you give it the best opportunity? I mean, I put in very little of this stuff every time, and all it's doing is it's adding some dead yeast, and it's adding some minerals and a bit of content that your yeast needs to thrive on, especially if you're doing a real light Pilsner or you're doing something with a lot of sugar additions. You may not have the nutrient levels that you need. Or you do a ton of adjuncts, you may or may not, I don't know. I know certain adjuncts give you more of certain nutrients and less of others, and Pilsner gives you more of certain things and less of others. So, yeast nutrient. Number 5, and this one's always fun because if you're on Reddit, you get a group of people who are like hardcore, I never do that. Number 5, yeast starter. And everybody else kind of gangs up on them and says, dude, do a yeast starter, don't waste your time. I've never had a problem. And then of course, you know, the next brew, they probably have a problem and went, I've never had this problem. They cursed me, they jinxed me. Yeah, whatever. Same thing. Why wouldn't you give your wort the yeast it needs? Get a good yeast starter. I've mentioned that in the past that professional brewers, from what I've read, the majority will tell you it's always better to overpitch than to underpitch. Underpitching is a little more dangerous, a little more haphazard, should we say? And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. If you're doing some experiments, go for it. David Heath recently mentioned that Kveik yeasts or Norwegian yeasts prefer less yeast, but up to 4 times the yeast nutrient to take off and get going. And he says, you know, underpitch, but give it a ton, more than you would ever imagine giving it on the yeast nutrient. So something to be aware of. Number 6, Saison yeast for temperature concerns. Yeah, I think I've been down this road a little bit before in different ways, but if you're brewing beers and you want to brew something in your house and you have no temperature control, and your home is an average house running between right under 70 degrees, because I know some of you run that AC really crazy cold, to let's say 75, 76, and maybe even 78, but 75, 76 would be kind of pushing it already because your wort's going to spike a bit up to close to 80, and most of those Belgian Saison yeasts can handle it, so it's not that big of a deal. But Saison yeast for temperature concerns. If you're just going to ferment at room temp, consider using Saison yeast. Now, if you're doing your garage, you live in Florida and it's summer, you're going to go to a Kveik yeast, or the Norwegian Kveik yeast. Number 7, you want lagers at 70 plus temp? Consider Kveik yeast, or Kveik, however you want to say it, yeast. The reason I say that is Hornindal is a great example. Hornindal will ferment crazy clean in the low to mid 70s. You can probably even spike close to 80 and still get an incredibly clean fermentation. I'm talking, you pick that beer up and you're like, there's like nothing stands out. It's super clean. If you had a hop in there, that might stand out, like a Saz hop or something, give it, a little noble hop in there, but super, super clean. The Kveik yeast do great. Now, if you're extreme and you're gonna be trying to brew something in your garage and you live, like I said, in Florida or somewhere really hot, then yeah, you're probably gonna make some amazing IPAs or other beers that benefit from fruit flavors, because Kveik yeast will go nuts and the flavors are extreme when you're up at around 85 to even 100, 105 Fahrenheit based on the one you pick. So, but if you're in the low to mid 70s, you can get an amazing lager-like fermentation from a lot of the different Kveik yeasts out there. Definitely look, because your mileage may vary based on which one you're using. But I know Hornindal, I've heard people use Voss, but Hornindal definitely is extremely clean, especially at those lower temps. Number 8, oxygenate your wort. Trust me on this one. The one time you don't do it, or you have a problem and your yeast just doesn't quite take off, that might be the reason, because you didn't do it. I don't care if you're, like I usually do, shaking the hell out of it, or I move it from one to another, knowing that it's gonna get all, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get some of that oxygen, majority is not gonna be oxygen, but you want some of that oxygen to get stuck in suspension in that wort, so that that yeast can just keep plowing through there. As that oxygen is being released, it's gonna keep eating it and just plowing through it until there is no oxygen. You can use a fish aquarium pump, and the key is you want a little air filter on that, so that way you know any air that it's sucking in and pushing in there, it's as clean as possible. And of course, you're gonna be at the other end of that, you're gonna have one of these little aeration stones. You can also use something like this. I will tell you, you don't get much out of these. It doesn't take much to blow through one of these. It's hard to control the amount of air coming out, but this is pretty much pure oxygen from my understanding. So, and that's another way of doing it. The cheapest and easy, well, cheapest and free, cheapest but free, yeah, free is cheap, is just shaking it, getting it as bubbly as you can. You just want some of that to get stuck into suspension, so that way you're all good. Number 9, learn to build your own water profiles. Yes, I'm gonna keep this very simple. Use standard water profiles that are very common, or from trusted sources. Like if you see John Palmer, you can pretty much trust the man is not gonna steer you wrong. Or from major breweries, where they're like, hey, this is what we use for all of our IPAs or our pale ales or our stouts, you know, and try to understand them a little bit by doing some research, so you can understand where they came up. You don't have to understand it pinpoint, but just kind of understand their perspective. The other one is, if you get it from a source that you don't know or don't trust, try to find that same water profile elsewhere and see if it kind of lines up. You know, the magnesium, the sodium, everything's in that same ballpark. It may not be identical, but the numbers are in the same ballpark and they make sense. Then use something like Beersmith or Brewfather, and you can put in your total water, or if you don't want to do the sparge, that's fine. I do everything. I do all my water, and then anything that's an alkaline, like calcium chloride or baking soda, I add that to the boil. I don't even add it to any of the water. I wait until the boil, unless it's trivial, then I might. So it keeps it simple. In the Beersmith or Brewfather, you tell it what your total water is, how much you're gonna use, and then you say, okay, you know what? Here's the profile I want. And you pick a profile like IPA, light lager, stout, whatever it may be, and you tell it to match that profile. It will take your distilled water, if that's what you're using. If you're using tap water, you need to have it tested, because I don't know what your salts are. I'm assuming you're using RO or distilled based on this number 9, learn how to build your own water profiles. So once you do that and you tell it to match that profile, it'll take that total water and say, okay, to make that water have this profile, here's your additions. And it will tell you, you know, you need 4 grams of gypsum, or 0.2 of a gram, yes, 0.2 of a gram of baking soda or calcium chloride, you know, whatever it may be. So you can break it down, and you know, then you can add your water additions. I add all of mine, except, like I said, to the alkaline ones. I keep those 2 separate. I add them right before I even start my mash, and I'm all good. And I do a pH test about 15 minutes into the mash, and things usually are perfect. If I have any alkaline, which are usually more for stouts or darker beers, I add those to the boil, and they're in there. It's not a big deal. I don't worry about it. Number 10, and this one, you're gonna hear from people who are much more knowledgeable than me. Don't use water profiles of regions or from random water profiles. When you see a water profile and it says, hey, this is the water profile for this country or this city or where this brewery is located, it doesn't mean that that brewery isn't filtering that water or altering that water for their beer. That's been going on for thousands of years, actually, but well, several hundred years, at least for us. I guarantee you they've been doing it extremely well. They use charcoal, they use different things to help filter that water to get the water profile they want, or at least close to what they want before their chemistry was that good. And now I guarantee you their chemistry is amazing. So don't say, oh, hey, that's from the same country, I'm gonna use that water profile. You might regret it. Now, I will give a little disclaimer. If that water profile kind of matches what other people would recommend that are trusted sources, then yes, you might be okay. But the majority, don't do it. Like one of the, I think it was 2 guys who've been around for a while, and I was reading a little excerpt from one of their books, said, well, it depends upon whose well you're pulling that water from and what part of the year and at what time of the day. And I'm like, wow, just kind of a little bit of an eye opener. So don't forget, join us on the next series where we do beers from around the world, do little taste testings. And I'll try to get some guests in here for taste testing. Don't forget, like, subscribe, keep sharing, and thank you again for joining us here at Bitter Reality Brewing.